Today I'll be walking you through the Olympus Super Control Panel. And as a base camera, I'll be using the Olympus EM5 Mark II. And the Super Control Panel is available on most Olympus digital cameras, but there may be some small differences between different models. But for the most part, about 90% of the Super Control Panel is the same. Now, where there are differences, I'll talk about those when I do videos about those specific cameras. But today, I think you can walk through this video and really get a good feel for what the Super Control Panel is all about. Now, the Super Control Panel is basically giving you shortcuts to the different settings available to you in the Olympus menu system. So it's just a quick way to access some of the more common features that you might want to have available to you more quickly than having to dive through and navigate the very elaborate menu system in the Olympus camera. And I've done a full factory reset on the EM5 Mark II, but so we can all be on the same page. But if you don't want to reset your camera because you've spent a lot of time setting it up, but you're not seeing the Super Control Panel, there could be a couple of different reasons for that. So let's see how we actually activate the Super Control Panel and when it does not show. Now, by default, the Super Control Panel is just activated by pushing the OK button on the back of your camera, and it should pop up like this. But if it doesn't, then go into the menu system and scroll down to your custom menu, and then we're going to go into menu D for display, and then we're going to go into control settings because the Super Control Panel is a different way of just controlling your camera, right? So we're going to click OK here. And then we have 4 different line items here that we can activate the Super Control Panel for. So I'm going to activate it for the PASM modes, or the photo modes for program, aperture, and shutter priority or full manual. And we can click over to the right on the D-pad, and you can see that I have the live Super Control Panel activated by default. And I'm not sure if it's default on every camera, but this is how you activate it. I'm also going to activate the Live Control Panel, just so you see what's there, because the Live Control Panel offers a couple other options and benefits that the Super Control Panel does not, but it's also lacking some of the features that you would see in the Super Control Panel, like it's not touch sensitive. You can activate the Super Control Panel for other modes, so let me show you that. Like, let's do it for the Art mode on your mode dial. So we'll activate the Super Control Panel there. And you can also do it for your scene modes, iAuto, and you'll notice that each mode or picture mode, like scene mode, has its own menu, the scene menu. Art mode has its own art menu, but again, you still have access to the live Super Control Panel. All right, so let's click the OK button, and now your Super Control Panel should come alive. But remember, I activated also the Live Control Panel because I'm in Aperture Priority, one of the PASM modes. If I click the Super Control Panel, I can toggle between the Live Control and Super Control Panel by just simply clicking the Info button while the Super Control Panel is up. And now I can scroll down and make a lot of the same settings that you would find in the Super Control Panel. And if I click the Info button again, it'll toggle back. But you have to be a little careful. Let me toggle over to the Live Control Panel. If I am in, say for example, here, I'm changing a movie setting, and I click the Info button, it's just going to let me change the settings for the movie mode. Let me click the Info button again, because you'll notice on the screen it says Settings, and it highlights Info. So that's telling you to hit the Info button if you want to make any changes here. So to toggle back to the Super Control Panel, I need to be in a mode that doesn't have an Info button. So I'm going to click the Info button here because there's no changes here that I can make with an Info button. And that takes me back to the Super Control Panel. And that's the same for when I go to the Art mode. So I'm going to rotate the mode dial to Art mode. And if I click the OK button, it takes me right into the Art menu where I can make the various changes. But if I click the Info button, it'll let me toggle to the Super Control Panel. and then I can make changes here. Now some of these you're going to be restricted to what you can do. Like for example, right now I can't change the art filter because I selected it in the art menu. But I can change white balance, ISO, image stabilization, etc., picture modes. So I can still change a lot of the same things I can do in other modes, but that's how you access them when you're in the art menu. But just be aware of that. So let me go back to the aperture priority, and I'm going to click on the OK button. And now we're in the super control panel. And if you notice that at the top of the super control panel, there's a little information bar to tell you what, or give you information about the settings you're changing. So for example, in ISO, you can see that it's telling me ISO 200 is recommended, that ISO low is an extension of the normal ISO range, and then we're in auto ISO, which is also recommended by Olympus. And then the same thing for white balance. Now, the information bar is not changing here. And if you look in the background, you can kind of see that it is changing the white balance as we're moving along. But if I click the OK button here, it'll actually push the super control panel out of the way and then allow you to see a nice preview of the changes to the white balance this way. And you can do that with some of the items in the super control panel, not all of them. But let's just leave this in auto, click OK, and now we're back to our live view. Let's activate the super control panel, and we'll go to the next one. And this is your autofocus area, which I changed a little bit earlier by accident, but if I click OK here, right now by default the D-pad moves the focus point. But you'll also see a little info button on the bottom left. So if you click the info button on the back of your camera, it will give you some additional options. And right now it's showing you a little face icon telling you're in face detect mode. And you can, let me go back there, click the info button. If you click to the right or left, you can change the face mode. So we'll just leave it to normal face mode. And if I click up and down, I can now change the focusing point. So there's all points, there's the 9-point grid, there's the, I think they call that the super focus mode. And then this is your normal single point autofocus. And this is what I normally shoot in. And then let's click the OK button again. The next one is just your different shutter modes available to you. And you can just kind of scroll through to see which ones are available to you. And I have a whole video on all the different shutter modes and different uses and how they work, as well as a separate video for the different autofocus modes. But for today, I'm just showing you what you can do in the super control panel. So let's put this back to the normal single shot mechanical shutter. Then down here is your image quality and file format. So these are all JPEG settings except where it says plus RAW or RAW. So when you're shooting RAW, it's only going to take a RAW image when you're in a normal photo mode, PAS and M. If you're shooting in the art filter mode or scene mode, it's going to shoot RAW plus JPEG anyway. But let's click in here. I normally like to shoot large fine plus RAW. And you can change the large fine. Large fine is not the maximum quality available to you. So we'll just do that real quick because that's a very common question that I get. We do that in the image quality G. I like to think of G as grading. And here's the image quality icon to set. We'll click over to the right. And normally I like to change all of these to just be large, super fine, which will give you the maximum quality for every JPEG, no matter where you are in the super control panel. So let me show you what that does. If I click OK, now you see it says large superfine plus RAW, but as I'm rotating the dial, it doesn't change because I've changed 4 slots. And unfortunately, Olympus doesn't let you turn off any of the slots. So I have 4 large superfines and 4 large superfines plus RAW. But that'll save you some headaches later. Because there was a time I went out on a job and I accidentally changed this to like large, medium or something, you know, like a low res JPEG image, and I forgot to shoot in RAW. I was still able to recover, but that's what I normally do. And then over here is your image stabilization system. So we have SIS1, and if I click OK here, it pushes the super control panel down, but also gives you a little better description of what's going on. So as you can see, we have auto image stabilization off, all direction, vertical shake image stabilization, horizontal shake image stabilization. And the one that you choose is going to be dependent on the kind of photography you're doing. So if you're panning left to right or you're panning vertically, you would choose one of the SIS2 or 3. If you just want the camera to decide for you, it will automatically detect which way you're panning and activate the appropriate image stabilization within the camera. And then all direction image stabilization means it's just on all the time. And I'll do a separate video on image stabilization and how that works, but that's for another day. All right, let me put this to large superfine plus raw. Let me put this back because that's what I normally set at. And then here is your aspect ratio. So let's click OK on this, and we can get a little preview, and you can see how the aspect ratio changes. So if I want to shoot in 1:1, which is the typical Instagram format, I can change it to this. But just keep note that a lot of the settings here, and I'll come back to this, only affect the JPEG file. Your raw image will still be the full 4:3 full resolution image. All right, and then just above that is your metering, and I'm going to click OK here so we can push that down, because I always like to see what the description is. ESP is, I forget what that stands for, but it's basically measuring the entire scene for light and trying to balance that. Center weighted metering, spot metering, and on the M5 Mark II and some other higher end cameras from Olympus, you can tie the spot metering to the focus point. The M10 Mark II doesn't let you, but the M5 Mark II, Pen F, EM1s, they let you do that. Spot highlight, spot shadow, and I have a different video that goes more into detail with the spot metering that you can check out. And I'll try to put links down below to all of the different videos I have for these individual things. And then here are your autofocus modes. And like I said, I have a video about all of these, but if you want to quickly change this, you can change it back to single point, continuous autofocus, etc. Now, these two sections, it says auto WB plus or minus. And these two are just for tweaking the white balance slightly. So if you want the camera to automatically select the white balance, but then you want to warm it up or make it a little bit cooler, no matter what scene you go into, while still being an auto white balance, you can do that here. And the A represents a scale from amber all the way down to blue. And then the second one here represents the scale from green down to magenta. So you can shift the tint or colors of the white balance. And it's a little bit awkward on the M5 Mark II. They've improved a little since this model. But let's click OK here. And then you can see the two columns here to tweak. So if I want to make it a little bit more amber, like a little bit of a warmer image, I can crank this scale up, and then I can click over to the right, and then using the D-pad, I can add a little more magenta. And unfortunately, you can't preview on this camera what it looks like, but if I push the, let me go back in there. If I push the record button, it'll just take a picture and you can kind of get a look at it. So just for fun, let's take a picture here, and then let's reset these back. And I can just rotate the front dial. I don't have to click OK or anything. Put these back to 0 and take another picture. And then if we look at these two side by side, you can see that one is definitely a little bit warmer than the other, but we're still in auto white balance. So, you know, you can use that creatively, and I have a whole video about using white balance creatively. But let's go into the white balance mode. And I'm going to click OK, and this will let me preview the different white balances. And it's pretty self-explanatory. If you're in fluorescent lighting, or you're in incandescent lighting, cloudy day, rainy day, shadows, sunlight, there's underwater, but this one is for flash. So if you're using an external flash or flash on the camera, you can set it for white balance to the flash. And you also have 4 white balance presets that you can create yourself. And you can change these, and I'll come back to that. Here's your custom white balance setting. And you'll notice the little info button is highlighted, or the word info is highlighted. So that means I can click the info button, and I can select a white balance. And if you're into really getting accurate colors, or you have a very controlled lighting situation, this is where you might use this. But generally speaking, let's just leave this at 5300 or 52. Generally speaking, if you need a custom white balance, the best way to do it is to make it yourself. So let's capture the white balance here, and make our own preset. So as again, the info button is highlighted. So I'm going to click the info button, and it'll tell you, the camera tells you, point the camera to a white sheet of paper. So I like to put the paper as close as I can to the subject while still filling the entire frame with the white piece of paper. So sometimes I have to zoom in or out to get that to happen, but in this case we're already there. So I'm going to click the shutter button. And then it's asking me, do I want to save this? So I'll say yes. So now I have the perfect white balance for the clown based on the light that's hitting it. And there's a lot of ways to get the white balance even more accurate. But for the average enthusiast like you and I, this is fine. Okay, and now that's saved. And saving different presets is very handy, particularly when you know the exact lighting setups that you have. So for me, like I do this video here, I have the white balance set in the camera that's recording to preset number 1. And then I do another white balance preset for when I'm over there doing my live streams, because the lighting, even though I use the same lights, the lighting is a little bit different when you move from one part of the room to the other. So I set another custom white balance over there, and then I save them into these presets. And like I said, it's a nice feature to have, I think, in your camera. And as I said, I have a full video on doing some creative things with that white balance. So check that out. All right. We're almost done here. Now let's go into the picture modes. And I'm going to click OK. And then if I rotate this, I can preview the different presets. As so, and then we get into the art filter. And the only challenge here is we have 15 art filters and 5 or 6 color modes, right? Or 7 color modes. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we have monochrome, and then we have a custom. So rather than having to scroll through all of these, because a lot of people don't use the art filters or all of the art filters, you can reduce the number of things that you see in the Super Control panel. So let me show you how to do that. You just go into the menu system, and you go back to the display, or menu D, and you go into picture mode settings, and click OK here. And this is where you can turn off the ones that you don't use. So I never use ePortrait or underwater. Sometimes that. But let's turn the rest of these off. Like so. All right, now I'll click the menu button to go back out. I'm going to tap the shutter button. Now if I go into the Super Control panel and I rotate the front dial, you'll notice all of the art filters are gone. I only kept the first one there. There's Color Creator and Art Filter number 1, which is the pop art. And if I click OK, you can see that this list is limited down. Even the picture modes, I only have 3, 4, and 5, whereas originally I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Now, let's talk about the one picture mode here that might be a little confusing. And that's the custom. How do you set that? Well, this one even if I click OK, there's no info button or anything for me to make changes here, right? So what I have to do is I have to go into the menu and go all the way back up to, looks like shooting menu number 1. And you'll see the picture mode is set to C, which is where we left at in the super control panel. And now I'm in custom mode. If I click over to the right, I can set the custom mode to different picture profiles with different sharpness, contrast, saturation, etc. So let's say, for example, and I do this a lot, I'll select monotone as my custom profile, but also I like to crank up the contrast, sharpness, use a red filter, and that helps bring in the blue skies. And I have a video on black and white photography that kind of explains all these filters a little better. And maybe I want a sepia. Now let's just leave it neutral. And then gradation. And you can select the various ones here. And we'll leave this in normal. But auto gradation kind of flattens the image, brings up the shadows and brings the highlights down. Normal gives you a nice normal natural S-curve in the tones. And then low key and high key, those are different types of photography that you can kind of experiment with, but we'll leave this in normal. So now let's go into the super control panel and preview what the differences is between the monochrome profile I just set up versus the normal monochrome. You can see quite a bit of difference. See how contrasty and darker it is versus this one. Particularly like the red buttons on the clown's outfit there. Since I used the red filter, the red buttons are a little bit brighter, right? And everything else is a little darker. So that's how you use the custom mode in picture mode in the super control panel. All right, and then down here are the same settings we just saw in the menu system: sharpness, contrast, tint, and filter. And it tells you at the information bar at the top, right? Sharpness, contrast, tone. I call it tint, but, and the filter. And watch what happens when I change this to custom. See, it brings up the settings that we had in the menu. But I don't have to go back in the menu. I can just adjust these back to whatever I want right here in the super control panel. What I can't change though is the picture mode itself, like if I want, natural or monotone or enhanced, etc. All right, now, let's go into the next item. This is our face detect, which I showed you in the other menu, but you can access it directly here. This lets you choose sRGB or Adobe, and this makes no difference to your RAW files. And generally I tell people just shoot an sRGB, because most people, their monitors, their cell phones, everything is in sRGB color space. And this will create a JPEG that matches that color space exactly, so everything is in sync. Color space really has to do with workflow for more professional work. Generally you have, Adobe RGB calibrated monitors, calibrated printers, then you calibrate your camera, etc. And even after everything's calibrated, in a blind test, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between Adobe RGB and sRGB, just with my dying eyes. But just know that that's available to you there. And then last but not least is direct access to the function buttons that you can reprogram. So if I rotate the front dial, you'll notice that I can rotate through the various buttons that I can reprogram on the camera. And this is where you might see a lot of difference between which Olympus camera you have. So for example, on the EM5 Mark II, I can go over here and you see a BFN1. And the B is in reference to if you have the battery grip attached, it has its own buttons on it, so you can reprogram those. The LFN is for the lens, so if your lens has a button on it, you can reprogram that. But what I like is, let's say I want to change function 1, which is here on the back. I can just click OK, and it takes me right to function 1. I click over to the right, and I can reprogram that to be, say, let's just jump to the digital tally converter, like so. Now if we look in the super control panel, you'll see that function 1 is now programmed as the digital tally converter and no changes to function 2. But if I want to change function 4, like maybe I never use HDR, I can click OK. And it took me right there, and I can change that to bracketing, which I do use sometimes. So this is just a reference to what your buttons are programmed to. So now when I hit the function 1 button, it does the digital tally converter. So that's my overview on the super control panel. Hopefully you found this helpful, but if you have any questions, just leave them in the comments below or go over to my forum at robtrek.com. Either way, I hope you enjoyed this, and hopefully we'll see you again soon.